Hello, welcome back to another pen talk. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for continuing to follow me on my journey, which I really enjoy. And sharing my journey with you just enhances the journey in my perspective. This video is going to explore a pen I've reviewed a few times in the past, which is a Jinhao 51A, and I think it is one of the better examples that I know of a design, which is a classic design, that has many variations to it and really covers a gambit from a very inexpensive, under $2. It comes in a wood barrel as well as a clear plastic barrel or a opaque plastic barrel with also some excellent resins. These two are separated because these two have the special nib that Bobby puts in some of the pens. And when I was on eBay, I saw he was selling that nib separately, so I bought some, and we'll see how easy it is to replace the nib in a 51A that you might have. This is Dreamland. This is just like an interesting blue acrylic. This is like a sunset. And this is Nyanggo, which is very similar to the Pen BBS resin. So let's dive in a little bit and talk about these different pens. Uncapped, we get to see some of these variations that Jinhao has done in this pen. You could get a standard Jinhao number 5 nib, which comes in that housing that was in the 992 and 991 and a number of other Jinhao pens. And it's a number 5 nib, which I've swapped out in other Jinhaos. So if you would like a pen like this, Jinhao gives you a lot of varieties of this pen, and you can, if you like that number 5 nib and you don't like a hooded nib, then you can use those. The other thing you'll notice is the wooden pen and these more advanced acrylic pens have this large metal clutch ring here. The two plastic ones do not have a clutch ring, and these are obviously the less expensive pens. This one here is the Bobby pen. As you can see, it looks very similar to the non-Bobby pen here that's next to it. One of the things in my exploration is that these inexpensive hooded nibs, I can't take off the section. I think they're glued on, and then I'll show you an example a little bit further on in the video about why I came to that conclusion. And also, we're going to look at the 601 and the 618, which uses that same type of hooded nib, so you could use that, the Bobby nib, in those pens if you would like. Here we have the tubular nib, which I think first appeared in the Parker 51. And part of the design of the nib was to be that streamlined pen with that nice section on it. The other idea of building a nib like this is less metal here, so for a gold nib it's going to be less expensive for the manufacturer, for the materials of the gold. As we look at the side view, we can see the top nib is the Bobby nib and the bottom nib is the standard nib. There we go, it's a little bit better view. Trying to get enough light in there to actually let you see that. So it's just a subtle turn up, but it does a substantial change to the feel of that nib on paper, and that's what I really like. And it also gives you a little bit of a wider line because and that bent up part is further down on the nib, away from that very extra fine point on them. And this is a nib which fits, like I said, in 601s and 618s in addition to the 51A. Here's a 51A I disassembled. And you'll notice that those pens with that metal clutch ring there also have this metal part to the section. And I used a good deal of force to take off that section, and I found some glue in the threads here which I think that was used, may have come out now, but there was glue there. And that made it tough. But I have this tool I got from Bobby a long time ago, which really lets you grip this section very, very well. And a larger diameter allows you to put more torque on it. And like I said, it took about as much effort as I'm willing to do with a pen to disassemble it. But then once I did, I was able to pull out this feed, which is an injection molded feed. And it does emulate a little bit what Parker did. And here's that collar on the feed. And then, of course, the nib that was on it. And the nib took a little bit of effort to push it off of this feed. It fits very tightly, which is good. And that feed has, a little bit of a look to it. So I'm going to replace this with a bobby nib, put it back together, and see if I can create a bobby pen. So here's a standard Vacuumatic Wingsung 618 that I disassembled. First time I've removed this diaphragm. I just used an adjustable wrench here. Took just a little effort to finally get it started, but then it unscrewed. And once it unscrewed, you need to have a little bit of effort to pop this out of the back of the barrel, but it all came apart. And this finned ink collector, which is part of the feed system, is very reminiscent of a Parker 51, in addition to this feed, which is, I think, is ebonite. And then you have your breather tube here, which, you do multiple pumpings, it pushes out air and then pulls up ink. And as we look at the nib, we'll see it's the same nib that's on the 51A. So we could also turn this into a bobby pen, but it already has a nice little bit of an upturn there. And this is probably a bobby nib. So let me get the one that was on here. I had too many nibs floating around. So this is the actual nib that I took out of the 601. You can see how fine that point is, no upturn. And there's some writing here at the bottom of the nib, which I'm pretty certain might say Wingsung. When I was buying nibs and stuff from Bobby, I just perused the site and saw other things that I wanted to have, and that's 2 replacement diaphragms for the 601s. And that's one reason why I pulled the diaphragm out of this one. And I also got some number 6 Fude bent nibs here. Those number 6 nibs will fit well into a Pen BBS pen, and it'll be interesting to see how they change that writing experience. So you may ask, what wrench did I use? Well, this classic adjustable wrench, as they're called, spanner of some sort. I mean, it just fits nicely there. Working over the camera, it's a pain in the butt. And then it's easy to turn this once you get that wrench in place. Since I have a number of 51As with the nice bobby nib, I decided I would put it into my 618 that I've disassembled. So one of the things I do is before I take the section off, put a piece of Scotch tape here with an arrow on it that points to where I need to put the nib in, and you do that so when you screw back in the section, if I did it right, it'll line up with the nib when it's fully in place. As you can see, I'm off a little bit, so I'm going to just readjust it and put it back together, and then we'll ink it up and write. These collector fins in the feed, they have this slot in the top which should line up with the nib, and then the bottom has this groove in it, which to me is usually the path when ink is pulled up when you fill the pen. I've readjusted the nib. Probably should have used a more colorful mark there, but I think we're in good shape to reassemble. I did put some silicone grease on these threads. And also it doesn't appear to be an O-ring, but there's that Looks like a seal that's built into that piece below the threads, and we'll put some silicone grease on that too. So in reassembling the 51As, you notice that this piece here that the feed fits into, and everything's all keyed. There's two little protrusions there which only fit into this section one way, so that keeps the nib aligned. If we look into this clear one, you can see those two protrusions there. You can also see the threads here that would indicate that this section is screwed on. But as I mentioned, I've used as much force as I'm comfortable with, and I can't get it apart. Part is the reason is that you can't really grip this end to really put a lot of pressure on it, but I'm fine with keeping the nibs that they came with. And we'll reassemble this one and put all pens back in working order. The question of what ink to put in my 601 with the new Bobby nib, and I decided this ink would be one I wanted to try again. I had it in a finer nib, and now we're going to try it in what I hope to be a wetter nib with a wider line. Yes, it's a wet ink, and I did smear the name. It's a pretty interesting dusty purple, I guess. Dusk is an appropriate name. You kind of get that kind of like twilight color there. Chromatography shows it's a blue with a pink in it. And if you let it dry for a day and then do it again, you'll notice there is some permanence. Not a lot, but it certainly pushes out that pink, which is a little bit more red here. So we're going to start with this pen, which I just put in the Bobby nib. It has a very nice ink window in it. So if you hold it with the nib up, you can see that that ink window is clear. If you turn it nib down, it becomes opaque, so you get an idea. It's about half full, I think. And I pumped it quite a bit. I'm not a fan of these vacuumatic fillers in this pen or in the Parker Vacuumatic or even in the Edison pump filler. I like the ones that have the pistons in. They fill quicker and more completely with less effort. So let's see how this nib lays down that Birmingham Dusk ink. My first impressions are that this nib is not as nice as the one in the 51A that I got direct from Bobby. It's not as smooth. You know, it's not annoying feedback, but just more than what I'm used to. And it's not quite as wet as I expected. It's not dry, but it's more of a medium wetness. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to work on smoothing this and see what we can do to help out the nib. I'm going to use my fingernail board. I'm going to do a few swirls on the coarse side with light pressure. I'm going to go to the medium side with about the same amount of pressure. And then we're going to go to the polishing side, and here we're going to go a little faster with a little bit more pressure and see what we can get. I mean, it's better, but let's go to the nib that I'm using as a comparison. So this is the Jinhao 51A with a Bobby nib. And this is just much smoother, a little less effort to write with. About the same amount of wetness. This is Papier Plume violet ink, which I think works well in this pen. You know, nice colorful barrel, nice colorful ink. So I think I got the 601 working as close as I can. I don't think it'll ever be as good as this nib. I'll try some additional polishing, but it's better than the nib that was in it originally, which to me was too fine and too dry. I wanted to show a standard 601 nib, but this is a 601 Vacuumatic, and you can see how ink gathers around that vacuum diaphragm there. I have a pump version of this, but I can't find it. But much to my amazement, because I have a very bad memory, this already has a kind of a bent nib on it. So I've already swapped this nib out. And this nib also writes fairly well. So this is how this nib works, and I like it. So one reason why I like swapping out nibs. So we've come to the end of this rambling video. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you've learned a little bit more about some of what I would consider to be classic Chinese pens. So may you find a pen that you love and use it to write with. Put ink on paper. Great experience. So we're going to say bye until the next video, and I can live with this nib and ink.